Here I've brought in this form that has a number of different planes on it. This is called a polyhedron. And then you see that same form over here as a grayscale to show you what the values of this form are. With each change of form, there is also a change of value. So over here on this form, you can see that this part right here has the lightest value, and that's because this plane is receiving most of the light. It is receiving the light directly, while this top plane is receiving the light indirectly. There's less light falling on this top plane, and therefore it is darker. And then this plane is even darker because it is receiving even less light. It is further away from the light than this plane is. And this plane is closest to the light, and therefore it is of a lighter value. And then this plane and this one are the furthest away from the light, and therefore they are the darkest value. So you have to keep this in mind when you're modeling your forms. Those planes or facets that are closest to the light will have the lightest values, while those planes that are further away from the light will have darker values. So they can be broken down like this: light values, mid-tone values, and dark values. So basically 3 values: light, mid-tone, and dark. And this helps to create the illusion of a 3-dimensional form, or a form that looks solid, a form that looks like it has volume to it. When you change values, you change form. So as the value changes on this form, from this light value to this darker one to this one that's even darker, you get a change of form. You see different planes that you otherwise wouldn't see. For example, if I filled in this value with this one, like that, you wouldn't see that top plane. But in order to be able to see the top plane, I have to introduce a different value, such as this one. Now you see this top plane and then this plane. So value change equals form change. Or as the form changes, the value also changes. Here's the spacecraft that's part of my rough color sketch. I brought it in, enlarged it, and turned it into a grayscale to show you that what I showed you with this form here to show the change of planes is applied to my spacecraft, or to any form that has a number of different planes. And to show those plane changes, you need to show different values. Different values equal different changes in the planes of a form. For example, you can see a plane change right here. This value is lighter than this one, and therefore you see 2 different planes. There's a plane here and a plane here. This difference in planes is only possible when you show different values. If I made this plane the same value as this one, then you wouldn't see 2 planes. You'd see 1 plane, like that. But by making one plane darker and the other lighter, I show a change of plane taking place, like this. And you see this elsewhere on the spacecraft as well. Right here, for example. There's a plane here, and then there's a plane here and a plane here. So it's like this. Top plane, then it dips down, then it goes across another plane, and then it comes up like that on another plane, which is this one. And then right here, it dips down again because there is another plane. So you see this internal contour that describes the changes of planes. These internal contours are very important because this kind of change of plane, where you have a high plane, plane on top, then a low plane, plane further down. These highs and lows of planes help to add depth to the form and helps you to be able to create a more realistic and convincing looking form. And now I want to turn your attention to this color form. Just as with the grayscale form, where changes occur on the different planes, so changes occur in color as well. If you look at this plane, you can see that it has a different kind of green than this one. And that one has a different kind of green than this one. And that has a different green than this one. There are different shades of green being created here due to the fact that these planes are at a different angle to the light source, which is right around here somewhere, right there. Depending on how far away the planes are from the light source determines how much light they get and how saturated or how desaturated the color will be. As a color receives more light, the color shifts to the color above it on the color wheel. So for example, on the color wheel right here, there is the green. And as the green receives more light, it shifts to the color above it, which is the yellow-green. As a color, however, moves into shadow like this, then that green will shift in the opposite direction toward the blue-green, toward the color that is below it on the color wheel. Remember, this is what I talked about when I showed you what happens to the color of the cube as it approaches the light and as it approaches the shadow. Same thing happens on this form or on any form that you paint. Now I think I'll add a highlight here. So since this color is a green and it is this one here, the yellow-green, the highlight would be a color that shifts one color above the yellow-green, which means that the highlight would have yellow in it. Always try to place a highlight on the form, on that part of the form that is closest to the light. So therefore, on this form here, that part would be right there. That's where the highlight would occur. So I'll pick up the yellow from the color wheel and then add a lot of white to it, which turns it into a tint of yellow. And the highlight occurs where the change of planes take place, which is right there. And I think I'm going to have to add even more white to that yellow to get an even stronger highlight. Maybe something like that. Now I made some changes, as you can see. The light source for this form here is a yellow light, somewhere around here, as I indicated earlier. So it's a yellow colored light that is an intense light shining on this form. If I had a blue light, that blue colored light, for example, like this, and make it a little bit lighter, add some white to it. That blue light shining on the green local color of this form would then change the green to a bluish green color. A tinge of the blue colored light would be added to the green, thereby changing the green a little bit. Now, it all depends also on how intense or how strong that blue light is and how much blue there is. If it is a light that has a lot of blue in it, then the green is going to change more toward the blue. So it will appear even more blue-green. If there's very little blue color in the light, then of course the green is going to change less in terms of it looking like a blue-green rather than a green. So for example, in this case here, if I mix this blue with that green right here, you can see how the blue light has changed that green so that it appears a little bit more like a blue-green. And then this top plane here will also change, and it will become more of a blue-green. So I'm adding a little bit of blue to that green to change it more toward the blue-green. But it doesn't look like this, like a true and pure blue-green. And that's because only a little bit of that blue light is being added to this green. But like I said before, if that blue light had a lot more blue in it, like this, like what you see here, more blue would be added to the green, and thereby that green would turn even more toward the blue-green, something like this. And then this green here would also turn more toward the blue-green, and it would be changed to something like this maybe. I'm doing this very quick, as you can see, just trying to get these ideas across to you. So the color of the light can change the color of the form, or the local color of the form. The addition of yellow that you see here on the color wheel to any color will warm that color, while the addition of blue to any color will cool that color. Therefore, the color in the shadow that you see here has some blue in it, which cools that shadow. Shadow color also has some of the complementary color of the local color within it. In addition, don't forget that a shift in color also occurs so that some of the color below the local color of the form will be contained within the shadow color. So the local color of this form is green that you see here on the color wheel, and therefore there's a shift that occurs where the color that is below the green, which is blue-green, will also be part of the shadow color. So since blue is already part of a shadow, blue has already been added here. So I don't have to add blue-green, since blue, which is right here, is already part of the shadow, as I mentioned. So there's already a shift that has occurred toward the blue-green because of that blue that is already within the green shadow. If you were going to begin painting this green shadow, how would you begin? Well, of course, you would begin with the green. And the green, in this case, as you can see, is a saturated green, a pure green. It hasn't been grayed yet. It hasn't been reduced in its intensity yet. And that then is done by adding the complementary color to green, which you see right here, red. So I'll add that. And that also darkens the green, as you can see. But in addition, as I mentioned, blue is also part of the shadow. And I won't have to add blue-green, because as soon as I add blue, it's like adding blue-green, because I'm adding blue to green, so I get blue-green. So I've done that. And just a little bit of blue. It's not that you see the blue. The blue is mixed in with the green and doesn't become obvious. So here's my shadow color. And that's how I mixed it. And that's how you would mix it. Now, if you need to gray it some more, you add a little bit more of the red. And you have to be careful. Of course, this is the way it's done when you're using paint. When you're using Photoshop, you just go to the color picker and then you select a low value, low intensity green from the color picker, which means that the complementary color hasn't been added, black has been added to the green to reduce its intensity. So this is an easy and quick way to select a dark, low intensity green, like this. But then you also need to add some blue, like this, for example, so that you get that blue-green in there, so that that shift in color occurs from the green to the blue-green. I made a change in the color of the shadow. I increased its saturation a little. Shadows have color. They shouldn't look dead and dull, unless the illumination is so dim that all the colors are reduced so much in their intensity that the shadow color will then look much more grayed and have less of a saturated look to it. But try to add more color to a shadow. Have it more saturated, but of course not as saturated in color as other parts of the form that are receiving more light. Things can get rather complex, but I'm trying to make it real simple here so that you can immediately start using this information on the forms that you paint. Now, since I have a yellow light, but it's a weak yellow light, there's not much yellow in that light, just a little bit of yellow, like that, which in turn tinges the plane here with some of that yellow light. And right now, I think this green doesn't have enough yellow in it. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to this green to warm it up just a little, so that the appearance is more of a yellow light shining on this cube, and that part of the cube appears warmer looking now, since adding yellow to a color will warm up the color, and adding blue will cool a color. However, this yellow, since it's receiving a lot of light, is also reduced in its saturation. As I mentioned before, a strong light will reduce the saturation of a color, so that you don't find the most saturated color on that part of the form that is receiving most of the light. Remember that each different kind of lighting setup will create a whole different set of colors. And there are, of course, different kinds of lighting, such as sunlight, artificial light, moonlight, firelight, or the light on a cloudy day, for example. And each one of these different lighting conditions will create a whole new set of different looking colors. I'm going to bring up the color picker again, and with the eyedropper I'll pick up colors from this form, and I'll start off right here, that plane that is receiving most of the light, and you can see where the color is in the color picker here. It's not a pure yellow-green color. If I bring that little circle over toward the corner, you can see a pure yellow-green, and over here where it says current, you can compare the color with the color that I just selected, and you can see what a big difference there is in the intensity or saturation of the color. So this color that is in the light has been reduced in its intensity or saturation. It has been muted somewhat by the intensity of the light shining on it, desaturating the color somewhat. So it's not that this color is a pure yellow-green just because it is receiving most of the light. That's not the case. Then the top plane right here, I'm picking up that color, and you can see that that color actually is more saturated than this color that is in the light. So it's because that color is receiving less light and is not being desaturated by the strong light, and that's why we see that that color is more saturated. There's more yellow-green to be seen there, more of what the actual color of this form is. Now I'll pick up the other green, which is darker, right there, and you can see that that green has been desaturated somewhat compared to this other green, which has a greater amount of saturation. But nevertheless, this darker green still is a green that has a certain amount of saturation or intensity to it, but not as saturated as the color on that plane above it. And then if I go down to the bottom of this form right there and select that, you can see that there is still a certain amount of saturation of color in this green, but it's less than the saturation of this green or of that green. So that bottom green color isn't a color lacking in any saturation or intensity. Even though it is in shadow, it still is a saturated color to a certain degree. And then when I go over to the color in the shadow here on the left side, you can see that the hue has changed somewhat toward the blue-green, because in shadow, as I mentioned, the color, the local color of the object or form, drops down one color or shifts one color to the color below it on the color wheel. But you only add a little bit of that, and I may have added a little too much of that blue-green to the green, altering it maybe a little too much. I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe it's okay that way. And you can clearly see that that color, because it contains some blue, a little more blue than the other greens, appears cooler. Shadows, when they are made by sunlight, by outdoor light or natural light, will appear cooler looking than those colors that are in the light. So you need to determine the degree of difference between the color in the light and the color in the shadow. How much difference in temperature is there between the colors? And also the intensity of the color or the saturation of the color in the shadow, as I mentioned, is reduced compared to the other colors that are receiving more light. But those colors that are receiving most of the light, the most intense light, are desaturated. Therefore, the purest color, or that color which is closer to the local color, or which is the local color of the form, is found in the halftone areas, or in the halftone planes, which, as you know, are these. Now I can add another highlight right here at this edge. I can pick up that yellow from the yellow sun and maybe make it a little lighter in value. More of a tint, more white is added to that yellow. So something like this maybe. And then I'll make that other highlight above a little more yellow. Remember what I said about the color of a highlight? So if the local color of the form is yellow-green, the color for the highlight would be a tint of yellow. The color shifts from a yellow-green up to a yellow on the color wheel for a highlight. If the local color of the object, let's say, is orange, right here, there's orange, then the highlight would be a yellow-orange, because the color for the highlight is shifting one color up on the color wheel, which gives you yellow-orange. Since highlights are of a very light value, if you use the yellow-orange for a highlight, that yellow-orange needs to be made into a tint. So you need to lighten that yellow-orange quite a bit to make it a tint. Something like that, maybe. And you still see just a slight hint of that yellow-orange in that tint. Sometimes you can even go darker, that is less of a tint for the highlight, maybe something like that. Shadow colors are moving in the direction toward violet, while colors in the light are moving toward yellow. That's the basic rule. So if I have a red object, red local color, that local color, as it receives more light, is moving up to the next color, which means that it is moving in the direction of yellow. And for the shadows, if the local color of the object is blue, then that color in the shadow is moving toward violet, in the direction of violet. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a violet shadow. It just means that the color is dropping down one color on the color wheel, shifting in the direction of violet. Now with yellow, for example, on the color wheel here, when a shadow is required for a yellow local color form, that shadow will result from the yellow moving in this direction, again in the direction of where violet is found. If you keep moving down the color wheel, you're moving in the direction toward violet. So therefore, with a yellow object, the shadow would tend toward the yellow-orange, producing a warm shadow, but not as warm as the actual yellow. If a cooler shadow color for the yellow is needed, then you'd move in the opposite direction toward violet, which means that the shadow for the yellow form would be a yellow-green, thereby producing a cool shadow for the yellow. A warmer shadow would mean going in the other direction and having a yellow-orange for the shadow. But of course you need to get the mixture right. It needs to be of a certain value, certain intensity. It needs to be muted somewhat. Don't use it in its pure state, and so on, the things that I've been talking about and showing you. Now, to increase the appearance of a three-dimensional form, you need to add cast shadows to those forms. What I'm going to do now is add a ground plane to this form here, so that it looks like it's resting on a surface, and then I'll add a cast shadow, which will further create the illusion of a three-dimensional form. And I think I'll use a orange color for the surface upon which this form is resting. And then I'll add a cast shadow. Now the cast shadow is a darker version of the color upon which this form is resting, and it has some of the complementary color of the light in it, as I mentioned before when I was showing you things about that cube. So first I'll start out by selecting a color that is of a darker value, but still an orange color. And then I'll add a little bit of the complementary color of yellow, which is violet. And I have to get the right value. Add a little bit of that to that darker version. So I end up with something that looks like this. Now shadows and their color, cast shadows and their color can be exaggerated, where you can add brighter or more saturated color, and you see this with some paintings that artists do. Bob Peak, the great illustrator, did this sort of thing many times in his paintings. So since the complementary color of yellow is violet, I could just add a violet shadow here and make it darker and more muted. It's a little too blue violet. Add a little more red to make it more violet looking. So this is an exaggeration of the color of the cast shadow. Now if you want to be more realistic, then you do this sort of thing here. Darken it right there. And then it gets progressively lighter the further away it gets from the object casting the shadow. Looks a little too dirty, a little too muted. So I need to increase the saturation a bit and add a little bit of that violet. Takes a little while to get the mixture right. Shadows need to look transparent, so I can add some dark spots in there, which will help to make that shadow appear more transparent. Darken it right there. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I already went over how to paint cast shadows, so I'm not going to go over it again. So something like that for now. And one more thing I will add, and that is that really dark crack, as it's referred to. Right there. Now that I added the ground plane and that cast shadow, I think you can see that the form appears to have even more volume, appears more three-dimensional than it did before. So cast shadows can help to make forms appear even more solid and three-dimensional looking. I should mention that while the true color of the form can be seen in the halftone areas, the halftone areas are affected slightly by the color of the light source. So if the light source is yellow, like in this case, the colors in the halftone will partake just slightly of that yellow colored light source. So they'll have a little bit of that yellow in there, but not much. Mostly this top plane rather than this one, because this one is further away from the light than that one is. That top one is receiving more of the yellow light source than this one is. So this one is tinged ever so slightly with yellow. However, it's this one that I mentioned before that is affected or changed the most by the color of the light source. If you're familiar with reflected light or bounce light, then you'll know that the shadow of a form will receive reflected or bounce light. That means that a surface that has a bright color, such as this orange color, will reflect some of its color into the shadow of the form. Therefore, this part, which is in shadow, will receive a little bit of that orange color, and that orange color will mix a little with the green, alter the green a little bit. And you can see that reflected light right there, that orange color being reflected into the shadow like that. And the same will occur over here, where this other shadow is. Just a little bit like that, mixing with the color of the shadow. I'm going to change the color of the plane on which this form rests. Instead of an orange, I'm going to add a bright green, like this. Now, what happens when you have basically the same color of the reflecting surface that the object has? Now, that bright green, that saturated green, is going to be reflected into the shadow, and what will happen is that that bright green is going to intensify the green in the shadow color. So the shadow color, which was more muted before, becomes more saturated, more intense, due to this bright green being reflected into the shadow color. And you can see that right here. See how much more green that part of the shadow looks than another part of the shadow. Now, getting back to the orange surface or plane upon which the form rests, and because the orange is a warm color and is reflecting the warm color into the cooler shadow, that shadow now consists of both cooler color as well as warmer color. So you can warm up a shadow by reflecting a warmer color into the cooler shadow. And the same goes for this other side here, where that orange color is being reflected into the cool shadow. Now, those parts of a form that are further up, like this part here, that part is going to receive reflected light from further up. So if there's a blue sky, some of that blue from the blue sky is going to be reflected at the upper part of the shadow. Something like that. So the shadow that is further up receives reflected light from above, while the shadows that are further down receive reflected light from below.